Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's Facebook Live session. I'm going to run through the same type of formula that we run through every week. Had some really good questions sent in from people who are watching the sessions. I'm going to run through a few of them at the beginning. And before we get to that, I'm going to go through some updates that we've had this week. So, as I do every week, we always have so many people dialing into these sessions and so many people asking questions. Process for this is if you're new to this and you haven't been to this before, in the comments section, just feel free to write a comment in there, which is a question that you want me to answer. And I'll move through the beginning parts of it and then I'll come to answer those questions. And just pop anything that you want in there and I'll deal with all the questions that come up. Absolutely no problem. The purposes of us here is to give some pragmatic advice to your business, to talk to you in simple terms about what the job retention scheme means, what returning to work means, and all the other things that tie into this as well. When we're talking about redundancies, we're talking about layoff, we're talking about all different areas that tie up to it as well. So anything that you want to go through, any changes that have been made, anything you want to ask about specific to your business, just pop them in there for us. And what we've also had is we've had some people who've said, well, this is really good, really informative. I'm getting a better understanding of some of the risks that my business is exposed to here from a HR and a health and safety perspective, and can I have a little bit more help? Can someone have a bit more of a conversation with me? Can you even come in and help me with some of this? And we can absolutely do that. And the last couple of weeks I've been saying that's something we can do for you. So the phone number, if you want to get in touch with us in addition to this session, you want a bit more advice, you want a bit more help, not a problem. It's 0800 046 3179. And we've got a web address as well. If you want to pop any more questions in there or you want a bit more help as well, that's krona.co.uk/FB Live. So what I'm going to go through now is I'm going to go through some really good updates that I've got. I've got three really key updates that we've had since last week. I'm going to run through those updates, talk about how that's going to change the landscape for businesses. And then we'll move on to a few FAQs that I had. I've got 4 FAQs there. And this is kind of a mix of all the questions that were sent in afterwards. Questions we didn't get a chance to answer last week. I'll run through all those questions and hopefully they'll be really relevant to you, your business as well. And if you get something off there, you think, do you know what, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I'd like a little bit more information, maybe something a little bit more specific to my business. No problem. Pop it into the comments section. I'll get round to that. And everything that I don't get round to today, we'll deal with. I'll wrap them up and I'll do the same thing and answer those questions at the beginning of next week. So I've got a list of updates here. And if I just go through those updates first, and then we'll move on to some FAQs that we're dealing with. So the first point is today's a really relevant day. When it comes to the job retention scheme, today's a really important day. Today is the deadline. Today is the final day that an employer can place an employee on furlough for the first time for the 3-week period to have passed before we can claim on the 30th of June. So to put this in a little bit more simple terms, come the 1st of July, the job retention scheme is changing. Think of it as 2 schemes, really. We had the initial scheme, and then we're moving on to the more flexible scheme come July. Now, to use the first scheme, we know all the prerequisite of that. We know how you get onto that scheme. There's a prerequisite to get onto the second scheme, the scheme that's coming in July, and that is that an employee was on a period of furlough for a minimum period of 3 weeks as of the end of this month. And for that to pass, today's the deadline. If they're not already on furlough, today's the deadline to put them on there. Now, this can mean one of 2 things, really. And the frustration we've got here, and I appreciate this is brand new law. This is to help businesses, and it's come out as it's developed, and we've got more and more information. Now, us as lawyers, us as legal advisors, HR, health and safety advisors, that it's meant that our advice has changed. Our advice has changed drastically over the last 10 weeks. And that's because the law's changed over the last 10 weeks, and we adapt our advice to that. And that's why these sessions have been really good, because every week we're coming back and we're saying, okay, we've changed a little bit. We've got a little bit more information for me. Let me tell you how that applies to your business. With this new scheme, the guidance for how this scheme works is coming out on Friday. So as of Friday, we'll have the full rules as to how this works. When I come on next Wednesday, again, I'll have more information then. I'll have more updates, but I'll tell you exactly how that new scheme works next week. We're going to get the information as of Friday. So today's the cutoff, though. So if you get it wrong today, you're going to find out on Friday, and that the horse is going to have bolted on that. But there's a couple of things here which are real options on this. That one, if your employee is on furlough now and currently sat on furlough and you've done that properly, you're going to be okay under the new scheme. The other question is, if you had a person who's not currently furloughed but was furloughed earlier on in the year for a period of 3 weeks, are they going to be able to go onto the scheme? Now, while that will be clarified on Friday, the thought process on that was maybe you could. Now, I got some really helpful information sent to me today from a lady called Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. Jackie sent a letter through to us, which had been sent over from the HMRC. And this HMRC letter clarifies that if an employee had been furloughed earlier in the year for a minimum period of 3 weeks, then that was going to be okay, and that would be clarified in the guidance. So this is an email we've got from HMRC to say that. Now, this isn't an email that I've had myself or an email that I've had a chance to speak to the HMRC about. So I'm just going to caveat it with that this is something that was sent in from someone who's really helpful, and we get things sent through to us of people who are attending these sessions as well. So, Jackie, thank you for that. And I think that gives us a really good indication that I think as long as an employee was furloughed for a minimum period of 3 weeks before, we're going to be okay to claim for them when the new scheme comes in July. So that's nice, a bit of clarity on that. Thank you very much, Jackie, for sending that in. But what we need to think about is that today's really the deadline. So if a business hasn't got it right by today, you can't furlough people come July. You can't furlough people on the new scheme. If you've got someone who you think, well, maybe I want to furlough them in the future, maybe I want to take advantage of this part-time scheme, which sounds fantastic, that we're going to be bringing in from July, well, unless they're furloughed and have been furloughed for a period of 3 weeks prior to that scheme coming into place, you can't use it. So today's the deadline. Today's the deadline to make sure that that's all done properly, to make sure everything's right for what you want to do with your business. So that's number one, today's deadline day on that. Second one, this was a really interesting update talking about schools. So schools was something that I've spoke about in probably every other session that we've done, because the position and the evolution of what's happening with schools and schools returning has changed. It's got a massive effect on businesses, because it's got an effect on businesses from the perspective of childcare. You've got employees who you want to return to work, you've got work for them, and they're saying, quite rightly, I can't come back to work because I've got childcare. My children's school is still not having them return, so I can't come back. And when we spoke, I think this was last week I covered this, was that it was about 70% of schools that could return had returned, and about half of pupils were saying that they didn't feel safe, or parents of pupils saying they didn't feel safe with them coming back to school, and what the options were for a business owner in that circumstance. Now, just to state out the position as to how it stands currently with schools and which years are back and what the positions are and all of that, I'll cover all of that now, just a really quick summary. So schools have remained open throughout COVID. That's for key workers and vulnerable children. So key workers and vulnerable children have always had the ability to have their children in school. How much of an education they're getting is varying, and what they're doing in those periods is varying. But what you've got a position where it's not the schools have been closed, they've been open to a select pool of people. On the 1st of June, reception, year 1, year 6 were able to go back to school. Now, as I said last week, not every school did that, and not every child who could have gone back was allowed to go back by their parents because they didn't feel it was safe. Part of that is they're mixing with key workers, and key workers in some circumstances are more exposed to the virus than anyone else. And the worry is that children aren't going to be able to follow social distancing guidelines like adults are as well within that school. So that was something that happened last week. But what we had was the rest of the reception years. Now I'll get to secondary school in a second, but basically with secondary school, we don't know yet. The likelihood is that they're not going to open before the next academic year, but we're not sure on that yet. But the plan was that for other primary school pupils, we'd have 4 weeks where they would go back. They would get back into school for 4 weeks, and then we would have them going back the next academic year when that comes in September. Now, as of this week, those plans have been scrapped. No other primary years will be returning in this academic year. That's clear. So we've got year 1, year 6, reception, they're back. None of the other academic years are going back. I think the likelihood is that secondary school is going to follow as well. So what does that mean for a small business? What does that mean for a typical business that we advise? Well, the problem you've got there as a small business is that maybe you were counting on, you've got an employee who you want to come back to work, and you have work levels which have increased to a level where you want and need your employees back. And this is something where, with us, that the advice is really shifting with what we're providing as a business now. Before it was, can I get my employees on furlough? Can I safeguard my business? Now it's, we're coming back. we're coming back. We're getting orders. Sales are growing. Clients are coming back. We need to start trading again, and especially come Monday. Come Monday, you're going to see a massive spark in the economy, a massive spark in the busyness of this country. You'll see the roads much busier come Monday because non-essential retail is open on Monday, which is going to mean the high street's open again. And what you've heard from a lot of retailers there around the world who've opened a bit earlier is that they've seen positive revenue in that period as well, which I see no differences to us seeing here, because less people are going to browse, more people are going to buy. You might have a lower footfall, but your actual people purchasing products is going to be pretty consistent. So that's something as well to think about the amount of people that are going out and shopping. And you've seen recently some of the queues at IKEA, at B&Q. Some of those queues show that the people are waiting to get back, and I think we'll see a massive spark in how busy everything is come Monday. I've got a little point I want to cover on that as well, about how we need to be thinking about that as business owners, even when we're not in retail, but how that affects our own workforce. But how it affects a business is when we go to childcare, is you've got an employee you want back, you can't have that employee back because they had childcare, and now that childcare period is extended, and we know it's going to extend until at least September now. So they're not coming back until the next academic year, and we need that employee back. So we've got a few options as a business there. We've got a few options we can consider. A lot of that depends upon what's in your contract. It's unique to a business. But one of the options that I've been talking about a little bit more this week with businesses is, have you thought about bringing in a temporary worker? Have you thought now, when before you thought you were going to have somebody back quite soon? It's not an option for businesses. There's other things to be discussing here, not just employment law. There's operational sides of businesses. There's keeping those businesses afloat within this difficult period. That if they've got sales and they've got revenue and clients they need to service, well, they need those people in and be able to service those clients. And what you might be thinking about there is, obviously it depends upon the skills of your workforce, how quickly they can be trained, how good the temporary market is for your business, but be thinking about a temporary worker. But bear in mind the risks that come with a temporary worker as well. The fact that the original employee might say, you've replaced my role, you might have a breach of contract, constructive dismissal issue, a discrimination issue for that employee as well. You've also got the new person you bring in. They're not going to be coming into a normal environment. They're going to be coming into a higher risk of them raising a protected disclosure, a higher amplified risk of health and safety issues, a higher chance of them going off sick, a chance of them shielding, a chance of them being in contact with somebody who has had COVID and have to shield. So all of these things need to be incorporated into a contract. And when we're thinking about bringing in those shorter term workers, those fixed term workers, those people on a variable contract, that's something that more and more businesses are considering now as well. That was the second one I had to go through. And the last one I had to go through was something which came out last night, something which I think is a really good point that's been clarified. And this is that parents returning to work after extended leave are eligible for furlough, regardless of today's deadline. So we've got today's deadline to get people on furlough. But if you've got somebody, an employee who is on maternity, paternity leave, adoption leave, shared parental leave, parental bereavement leave, then those employees can come back and be furloughed if they come back after the 10th and they weren't furloughed before that period. Now, there is one caveat to this, though. There is one caveat to this when you read through this, that this will only apply where the work for an employer who has previously furloughed employees. So if you're a business where you only want to furlough the lady who is off, currently pregnant, but is coming back after the 10th, you can't do that unless you've furloughed somebody before. So essentially, unless you're on the scheme, unless you've been on the scheme before and claimed under that scheme, you can't have that. But if you have and you've claimed under that scheme before, you don't need to have those individuals furloughed for a period of 3 weeks. The 10th cutoff doesn't apply to you. You can just use the scheme later on as it goes, which is nice that that's been clarified as well. So the other thing that I had was a few FAQs that we've got. I'm going to run through these FAQs now, and then I'll jump onto the questions. And this is a really good time for you to just pop a question in there in the comments side of things. Let them build up, and I'll move through those questions. And sometimes we get multiple people asking a similar type of question, and I'll try and adapt and answer and pick a few together to deal with that issue. So the 4 FAQs that I had from last week that I wanted to run through, and hopefully these will be relevant to your business as well, was number 1 was, we now have an employee who is saying that she can't return until September when the schools reopen. What are my options? I need somebody in work. Now, I covered this at the beginning, but what I didn't cover is what the options are to a business in that circumstance. And you've got a few options. The one I spoke about, which I think is quite an attractive option now, is that you look at bringing somebody in part-time. You've got things to balance here. Yes, I'm going to talk to you about how that falls within employment law and the risks you've got. I'll deal with that when I do the options. But what you also need to be thinking about is your business owners or your managers or your people accountable. You need to be able to deliver services to your clients. You need to be able to generate revenue for your business. That's what's going to get you through this time and get your business growing again. That's another thing you need to balance. So when we talk about options, option one is you can leave that individual on furlough. Lowest risk option, you can leave an employee on furlough. They can take advantage of that scheme. Bear in mind that what you can claim under that scheme is tapering down. What you pay to the employee is going to remain the same. What you're getting is going to taper down. So that's a point to consider when you're thinking about that. But yes, you have furlough as an option. You could also look to agree a period of unpaid leave with that employee. That attracts somewhat more risk than the furlough option, but it gives you the ability to not be paying out under furlough because you don't have that lack of what you can claim back, the gap in what you can claim back now that's coming up soon. That's another option you've got as well. Another option that businesses have asked about is disciplining employees for failure to attend work, failure to adhere to the contract, failure to follow reasonable management instructions. Now, while in theory this is something that a business could consider, in this circumstance, I would advise a business to steer away from that because that's going to attract a substantial amount of risk. And that's something that a business needs to consider in those circumstances. But every time you deal with each one of those options, you've got to look at the individual business, primarily the documents that they have in place, the rules of play, the terms and conditions of employment, the employee handbook, and also then about what that individual is saying. Is there anything we can come to on a middle ground on? Is there anything we can agree to in that circumstance? And we would advise against taking that disciplinary option unless that was something that a business really felt that they wanted to do, but appreciated the risks in doing that. So yes, there are a few options available to a business. Easiest one being leave the employee on furlough, but that doesn't solve your operational problem of having to service your clients that you've got. So second point is, I suppose this flows quite well into the point I just made actually. Do we as a business have to make the payments up to 80% in September and October to qualify for the furlough payment? So let me just talk to you a little bit about how the payments are going to change under this scheme. Now, to make this really simple, we pay the employees whatever we've agreed with them. 80% we've agreed with them. If it's 100%, we've agreed with them. We keep making the payment to them that we've agreed to them. But for the principles of me explaining this, let's say that we've agreed with the employees that they're going to go to 80% and we're going to reclaim 80% under the job retention scheme. Let's use that as the example. So we've got an employee and the scheme's going to change. What we can claim back under that scheme is going to depreciate. But in simple terms, we pay the employees through our payroll. We pay them 80%. That is not changing. That remains exactly the same. You've got an employee who's off until the end of October when the scheme ends, and the Chancellor was very clear that is when the scheme is going to end. There's going to be no further extension. If you've got an employee who's off until the end of October, you continue to pay them 80% through the payroll. That doesn't change, and this new scheme doesn't change that. What is changing, though, is what we as businesses can claim back under that scheme. That is what is diminishing. So when we get to July, what we can claim back, and July and August, what we can claim back under that scheme is depreciating, that we can't claim back national insurance, we can't claim back pension contributions like we could before. The real changes come in when we get to September and October, when we can claim back 70%, and then in October we can claim back 60%. Now, thinking about this is going to affect different industries differently, and I covered this last week as well, that if you've got somebody who's in a trade which doesn't have an opening date, well, this is fine for offices, this is fine for non-essential retail as of Monday, that's going to be open before the scheme, but what about hairdressers? What about pubs and restaurants? What about those businesses who don't have an open date yet? Don't have an open date which is coming before July. Now, are those businesses going to be in a position where redundancy becomes a more attractive option? And as we are now, I can tell you, with us being on the front line advising thousands of businesses, that is what the advice is turning to since the new scheme was launched, is that option where I spoke before to say that redundancy is something that carries an increased amount of risk at the moment, because when you make a redundancy, you always need to look at the suitable alternatives to that redundancy. And one is the job retention scheme, which we didn't have before, that with the job retention scheme diminishing in what you can claim back, that becomes a less suitable alternative, a less attractive option. So businesses are contacting us and saying, well, that's what we're thinking about doing now. We're thinking about redundancies now because we can't see ourselves opening within that period. Now, The reason that I think that this might change in the upcoming weeks, the government will announce something new on this, is that you're going to have businesses who are going to be subject to a big problem there. But if those businesses can have an open date in July, or a prospective open date in July based upon the R rate, then I think that we're going to be in a position where those businesses are going to look a little bit better on that. And what we don't want, and I know what the government doesn't want for how much they paid out in this scheme, is for businesses to get to this point now and make mass redundancies. That isn't what they wanted. They want to help businesses out of it as well as they help them into it and through it as well. And that's what the phase scheme is supposed to be set up to do, but it does pick out a few of those businesses. So in simple answer to this question, which we got from a couple of people, yes, you have to continue making 80% payments to them, and what you can claim back is reduced. So just to finish that point, what if you don't make 80% payments to them? What if when it goes down to 70%, we as a business pay 70%, and we claim 70% back from the government, so we don't lose anything out? Well, what that means is you can't claim back anything under the job retention scheme. You can't use a job retention scheme. You have to pay your employees a minimum of 80% to be able to use the scheme. If you start paying them 60%, 70%, you can't claim anything under the scheme. You can't claim the 60, you can't claim the 70, you can claim 0. Okay, so the third question we had was, and we had this off a few people in slightly different ways, but I think this example covers it really well, is when we get to this new flexible scheme, which is going to start at the beginning of July, can we get our employees to work half days and claim the other half of that day under the new flexible furlough scheme? Well, the Chancellor gave an example, and when he delivered this, he said that we want to give maximum flexibility to employers. And when he gave an example of an employee working 2 or 3 days a week and claiming under the job retention scheme for the other 2 or 3 days within that week that they didn't work, and allowing employees to come back and do some type of work, which they can't do at the moment under the job retention scheme. So that was something that was a nice example, was made clear, but straight away, I thought exactly the same thing as soon as I was listening to it when he was giving the announcement. What about part days? Because when we've done these sessions weeks ago, weeks before we had this announcement, I was talking about how I'd like to see a flexible scheme come in. The government was saying that was something they were considering. I was saying how much I thought that would. And the clients we were advising and what I knew from what businesses were asking, that is what businesses in the UK were looking for. They wanted that more flexible option. I was so pleased when that came in. But with the examples I gave before, an example I gave last week as well, was about thinking of this as you've got as business owners here, the thought about employees that have been out of work sometimes for 3 months, out of work, 4 months out of work. You've got a position there where if you've got an employee who hasn't worked for 3-4 months, well, what do we need to do to get them back into work? If they come back in day one, we've got to think about that employee and think about the service we're delivering and the training of that individual as well. How we're going to get them back to work, something we've got to think about as business owners. And what I thought was a really attractive option, and I thought of this as akin to someone who's been off for a long period of sickness absence as well, that we don't just say, come back in Monday and you're back in 5 days a week. What we do with somebody who's been off for a period of time with sickness absence, or somebody who's been off like this with a period of time away from work, to help them phase nicely back into how they were working before, is say, let's do a phased return to work. Week 1, let's do 2 days. Week 3, 3 days. Week 4, 4 days. Week 5, we're back up by week 5 onto a full-time working pattern. Well, what I never like to do when I'm doing that with somebody who's returning from sickness absence is say, come in Monday, Tuesday, we'll see you next Monday, Tuesday. Because, yeah, they're doing 2 days, but they're not then in work. And you think about the detachment from work, it's going to be no different from people who've been off with furlough, is you've got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 5 days of them not being in work, then 2 days back in work again, then off for 5 days. Now, I don't like that pattern. And what I would like to do, I agree with the person who asked this question, this would be my preferred way of doing it, if it was a business like that and we were bringing people back on a part-time basis, is to say, come in Monday, Tuesday, half day, come in Thursday, Friday, half day. So then the only day, they have 2 days in, 1 day off, 2 days in, 2 days off, 2 days in, 1 day off. And that repeats round. And I like that pattern. I like that pattern, the thought of getting somebody back to work like that. I like how they can interact with other departments. I like how they can deal with different clients over those days and be available if I need them, rather than if they deal with a client on the Tuesday, I haven't got that employee back in until the following Monday. I have to deal with that client for 5 days, and maybe they want to speak to the gentleman or the lady who's been speaking to them and dealing with that in my business. So that's something that I always think is a nice pattern, a nice way to return them. But on answer to this question, as of now, we don't know. This is going to get clarified on Friday. I hope when it does get clarified on Friday that you are allowed to do half days. What you've got to be thinking out as a business here is about how you record this, what system you use to record this. This is something that's very important. you've got a spreadsheet that might do this and complicated rotors in there. You might have a wall board. You just need to revise and think about these things and whether that's going to be fit for purpose in future as well. And the last question that I had was, with non-essential retail open, I said I had this question I wanted to come to later as well. With non-essential retail opening this Monday, is there anything a non-retail business needs to consider? Yes, absolutely there is. So for non-essential retail and all these businesses that are opening up Monday, you would like to think that, as I've said before, number 1, 2, and 3 on every business's list now who is opening is that they've got their health and safety right, that they're complying with the new rules, that they've got this right, they've got a professional in to do this health and safety work for them, help them with their risk assessment and make sure they've ticked all these new boxes that they have to do, because the HSE are coming in and they're investigating businesses now, and rightly so. For businesses who aren't complying with this, rightly, they're coming in, they're looking at those businesses and they're going to be imposing some serious fines as well. And businesses need to make sure they've got that right. So for all non-essential retail who are opening on Monday, you would think that's been done already for a shop who's going to open on Monday. Well, what do we need to think about as other businesses? I don't work in retail, but how does that affect me? Well, it's me and my business. Well, what I know is as of Monday, my employees who are commuting to work are going to have a much heavier commute than they have before. I know that straight away. Traffic's going to be heavier. Public transport, which is the most important one, traffic's heavier, but where are they exposed to more risk of transmitting the virus there? They're not really if they're sat in a car. But what if you have an employee who takes the train? We've got businesses in London, they take the tube. What's the tube going to look like on Monday? Well, tube's going to be much busier on Monday. We know that already. So what do we need to think about as business owners in that circumstance? Well, a couple of things that we've been thinking about is thinking about staggering start times for employees, thinking about staggering their start times so they might come in after the morning rush. We might stagger our employees throughout the morning as well, and thinking about what PPE we're going to provide to our workforce as well. And what we're helping a lot of businesses with now is saying, let's get the masks, let's get PPE out to them to help them get into work, what they're going to wear on the way into work to make sure they've got that covered. And that's something that we need to be thinking about, just that duty of care we've got to our own workforce and making sure they're nice and safe and secure. And that's what we need to make sure that we do. So that's what I will be considering as a business, that the frequency of travel is going to increase, the footfall is going to increase as of Monday. And another thing that I just wanted to end there with a little update as of Monday, it might not be of massive interest to too many people, but zoos, safari parks, drive-in cinemas, I don't think I've ever seen a drive-in cinema, but drive-in cinemas are going to be opening on Monday of next week as well. So you're starting to see more of these open air areas where we think there's less risk of the virus transmitting that are going to be opening. And I think you'll just see with non-essential retail opening on Monday, I think next week will feel totally different to this week in how busy it is, how many people are out, how many people are working, and think about how many people work in retail. We have a lot of retail clients as well as we've helped. So think about that as well. That's something that's going to be coming up next week. So like I said before, I'll move on to the questions section now, and that's how we'll go through to the rest of the session. But anything you want, just pop it in the comments there. We'll get round to everything. Everything we don't get to, remember, you've got the opportunity to contact us directly and ask some questions there. But I'll get round to the questions and I'll deal with them and pool them together for next week. Okay, Andy, I think you've jumped the gun before one of my updates there. Well, I'm impressed. Quick question, hopefully, is furlough deadline extended for those returning from maternity within the period? Yes. Yeah, that has been extended. So the 10th deadline doesn't extend to those individuals. There's a few others within that category as well. Just to remind people on the others who are within that category, you've got maternity, paternity, adoption leave, shared parental leave, parental bereavement leave. They're the ones that fall within that exemption as well. Okay, Michelle. I think this probably came before I covered this up in one of the points as well. It shows that these questions, though, are the same questions that everybody's still thinking about, the same questions everybody's still answering. So if we still have staff members on furlough in September, do we have to top up the 10% or can we pay the 70% furlough only? What you're paying to the employees never changes. That's the simplest way to look at it as a business. You keep paying the employees 80%. If you don't do that, you can't claim under the scheme. But what you can claim back under the scheme is diminishing over the upcoming months. So yes, we just keep paying them 80%. That doesn't change. Okay, another question here. I've got an employee requesting to continue working from home when I've asked them to come back into the office. Do I have to accept her request? This is a really interesting question. This is a question that is taking up a big chunk of the advice that our consultants are giving at the moment. This is such a frequent question across the UK, across the widespread of businesses that we advise and we help, that you've got employees, and it's an emotionally charged situation because you've got employees who are saying, I don't feel safe for whatever reason, whether that's rational or not. They're saying, I don't feel safe with returning back to the office. I don't feel safe with coming back to work. I know you said you've done all your health and safety and you've got everything in order, but personally, I don't feel safe and I refuse to come back. That's a job which can't be done from home as well. And they're saying they don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable with coming back into the office. Now, as a business, you've got a list of options here you can deal with. And with every business we speak to, when we advise you, that we'd go through a bit more detail within that business about which options are best for you, which options apply, which option you want to take, what risk those options attract as well. But whenever I speak to anybody about this, I'll go through the options as well now. But whenever I speak to anybody about this, like I said before, if you're saying that you're getting your workforce back into the building, you're saying to them, we've done the deep clean, we've done the risk assessment, we've published that, we've communicated that with our workforce, we're happy we've done everything, the social distancing, everything in the office is all labelled up, really happy with how we've set everything up, we're ready to go. We're happy we've complied with our health and safety to the degree that if the HSE came in and had a look at this, they would be happy with it as well. Now, a business who's done that themselves, a business who's not done that without professional help, I would always advise against that. You get some professionals and you get someone to have a look at this and help you with it. And I always say to a business, whatever option you're going to go at from the list I'll give you now, 1, 2, and 3 on your priorities list has got to be that you've sorted your health and safety out. You need to know that health and safety is bulletproof, your employees are safe, they're protected, and if somebody came in and tested that, you would pass that test, because that test is much more likely to happen than it ever was to happen before. The HSE have had £14 million worth of funding for them to undertake these investigations. So the options that you've got if an employee is refusing to return to work. So option number 1 you've got is leave them on furlough. That's option number 1 you've got. So job retention scheme says there's 3 things that need to be done for that scheme. 1, that the employee doesn't work while they're on that. That's going to change soon when we get to the flexible one. But the employee doesn't work when they're on furlough. But just to caveat that, sorry, what's not going to change is they can't work while on furlough. It'll be the days they can work and days they can't work. But when they're on a furlough day, they can't work for those days. So that isn't changing really if you think about it. So number 1 is they can't work. Number 2 is it's for a minimum period of 3 weeks. And number 3 is that it's due to the coronavirus situation. So they're the 3 things. And we're okay with that. We're okay to leave that employee on furlough. But for a lot of businesses, that doesn't solve the problem because you're asking them to come back to the office because you've got work for them and you need to service your clients, or you need them to generate revenue for you. There's a reason why you want them back to the office. So not sure that solves a business's problem. The other option they have there in that circumstance is to say, okay, we're going to put you on a period of unpaid leave. Now think about anything to do with furlough when you're changing hours for employees, when you're changing days. I talked about changing start times before. Basically anything in contract law can't be changed unless it's agreed between both parties. So if you want to change the hours of work for somebody or the days of work for somebody, you're fine to do that as long as both parties agree. There's an offer, there's an acceptance between both parties. You can't just start changing people's hours or people's days of work or people's salaries or things like that. The same as we couldn't with the job retention scheme. We had to agree with them to go on furlough. Secondary, we also had to agree with them that they take 80% pay. If we don't agree to that clause, then we're a breach contract. Fundamental breach of contract, constructive dismissal claims, that's all the risk that attracts as well. So think about that in this circumstance as well. That if you're going to put somebody on a period of unpaid leave, you've got to agree with them that they're going on a period of unpaid leave. Unless your contract gives you the right to be able to do that. The contracts sometimes have those rights as well if they're worded in there, and that's thought about as something that could come up in the future. So think about what's in the contract first. We can think about a period of unpaid leave. The other thing to think about is disciplinary. So if you're happy that your business has complied with all their health and safety, and this is why I say number 1, 2, and 3 on the list, because the employees are in a position now where your bluff could be called on this. And if you haven't done that to the top professional standard that we should be doing it to, there's a good chance that someone's going to come in and be looking at that, especially if you're in a dispute with an employee who are now being encouraged and given a really nice method to go to the HSE, which they should have, to be able to go to the HSE and report any health and safety breaches if they don't feel safe. You then be dealing with the employee who's, in that circumstance, raised a protected disclosure. You're dealing with that and the extra protection that attracts. Also having to deal with the HSE, them coming in that investigation. That's why you want to make sure that your risk assessments are done and everything's in line. Especially if you're going to go for such a draconian measure as saying, I'm going to discipline employees for not coming back. And that's an option businesses have. You've got work, the work's available, you're saying that's a reasonable management instruction, and there's a failure to follow that reasonable management instruction. And before that, I'd be talking to them, I'd be discussing with them about if there's anything else we can do, anything we can do to appease these concerns that they've got. But they're all the different options that a business has, and they all attract a different level of risk. Of course, the disciplinary attracts the highest level of risk. For one, from an investigation and things being looked at, but also from that employee saying that was an unfair way to treat people, all the way down to furlough, leaving them on furlough, which is going to solve your problem for now, but or are they going to be in a position to come back even when the furlough scheme ends at the end of October? That's another thing to consider as a business as well. And also something there is the operational difficulties you're going to have as a business as well. Okay. Thanks, Andy. You're guessing everything before it comes up as well. So, Hema, I've got a question here. Can a furloughed employee be made redundant? Simple answer is yes. Now, I'll talk a little bit wider about how this applies to a business. So what you've got to think about here is that I've said this on pretty much every session I've done, and just let me reiterate this for other people that are on here or people who are new to the session, is that normal rules of employment law didn't change. They didn't get superseded by the job retention scheme. All that happened with this was they just brought in something new. A new factor got brought in, something called furlough got brought in. This was an American term. It was something that we'd never had here before. I'd never heard of it before. It was something that we didn't have here before. And this is something that we've, as lawyers here, had to get to grips with really quickly. But that's all that's happened. There's a new category. That's all that's happened. It doesn't mean that this has completely got rid of the ability to fail somebody's probation or dismiss somebody for conduct reasons or dismiss somebody for medical capability in this period or dismiss someone by reason of redundancy. It's not removed our ability to go through any of the fair reasons for dismissal. But what it has done is it's added in another option. That's all it's done. It's added in another option. And that other option does affect redundancy. Now, with redundancy, to be able to claim unfair dismissal, that employee needs 2 years service to be able to bring that claim. Think about that straight away, because it's a claim of ordinary unfair dismissal. So they need 2 years requisite service to be able to qualify to bring the claim of unfair dismissal at the employment tribunals. So that's point one to think about as well. But if you've got an employee who is redundant or you want to take through a redundancy process, Hema, my advice on this, maybe 4 weeks ago would have been a little bit different. That's how I'm talking about how this is evolved and changed. If you've taken advice a while back, you need to make sure that you're working with somebody who's keeping themselves up to date with everything that's changed in this and advising your business on that as well. But with redundancy, what you had before was, yes, you could make redundancies. That was something that was absolutely no problem. You could still go through that. And what you could do as well is, if that employee served that notice period, there's nothing in the scheme that says you can't claim that notice pay. If the employee's furloughed for their notice period, you can claim that back under the job retention scheme as well. There's nothing that says we can't do that. I wouldn't say that we could do that for pylon when you pay somebody in lieu of notice, because they're not employed for that period. So you can't claim back under the job retention scheme for a period that they're not employed. But if they were employed and they were furloughed under the rules that we know, then yes, you could claim back the notice period as well for that individual. But just the last point on redundancy was, when I gave this advice 4 weeks ago, I was saying to businesses to think that we've got a really nice, suitable alternative to redundancy. And that's what you have to do when you go through a redundancy consultation as a business. You look at that and you think, and I'll give you an example of a business that I represented in court, maybe getting on for 10 years ago now, 8 years ago, something like that. And this was a business that I represented who, it was a beauty salon, small beauty salon, and they had some individuals in there, and they did like low level beauty treatments. And what they were thinking as a business was the beauty side of it wasn't that profitable, so they were going to make those people redundant. And there were 3 people who worked on that team. One of them had length of service, and that was the lady who brought an unfair dismissal claim. And back then it would have been 1 year's service, not 2 years service as it is now. But this lady had the ability to bring a claim of unfair dismissal and brought that claim at the employment tribunals. And this was a claim that I settled because it was a claim that was going to lose. And the problem that we had, it had a high risk of losing this case. And the problem that we had with that case was that when I went to visit this client, they were still operating, and there was a nail bar within the same salon. And I said to them, what about the nail bar? What about the individuals who worked there? The lady who we made redundant, when we put the pool together, the pool of redundancy, all the employees who you're considering for redundancy, you might have a pool of 20 and 2 redundancies you're going to make. 18 people are keeping their jobs. 2 go, and you go through a scoring matrix and you set out how that's going to work. But with these individuals, could they have done those individuals' jobs quite easily? And they could And it's for that reason that they should have been pooled with them. Those transferable skills. That was a suitable alternative to redundancy that this lady could have taken because there were short service employees on that team. That was the problem that we had in that case. Now, think about this when you're talking about this current situation, is that think about what alternatives to redundancy do you have? You always had the same ones of other jobs within your business that they could do transferable skills and move into other jobs. But one of the things that we didn't have before was the job retention scheme. Furlough and the job retention scheme is an alternative to redundancy. It was a very attractive option. It had no real downside for a business. You paid the employee 80%, you claim back 80%. Yes, you've got a cash flow issue, but how that was seen, I think, would have been that would have probably been a suitable alternative to redundancy. Now, that scheme has become significantly less attractive as it moves forward when you can claim back 70% and 60%. And I think when you get to that position, I think you're in a much better position as a business to say that that isn't a suitable alternative to redundancy anymore. It's not suitable that I continue to pay that money, even when I don't foresee that I'm going to even have the need for that employee later on. So yes, we can make redundancies while people are on furlough, and we can do other things as well. We can place employees on layoff. We can do short-time working. All this is dependent on what's within the contract as well. So Jeanette, just as a side to that, will furlough pay redundancy cost? What you've got to think about with redundancy costs is you've got two parts to this. You've got the redundancy payment, the payment the employee gets for redundancy, whether that's statutory redundancy payment or whether or not your contract has an inflated rate of redundancy pay. That payment, no, that can't be claimed back under the scheme. However, the notice pay, if you've got someone who is working for that period, so they work their notice and they're furloughed for that notice period, then there's nothing that says that that's excluded from the scheme, that we can't claim that back. Okay, let's have a look at a couple more questions here. Okay, how does pay work for, another question for you, Hema, good question. How does pay work for furloughed employees that you ask to take annual leave? Can employees insist on being paid for annual leave? So with annual leave, an employee who is on furlough continues to accrue annual leave at the same rate that they accrued annual leave before, unless you've agreed with the employee to have a reduced rate of annual leave for a period of time. You can only do that, though, if that doesn't take them below their statutory minimum, 5.6 weeks of leave a year. Just let me simplify that a little bit. So with a contract of employment, you can agree to make any changes to a contract as long as it doesn't take it below the law of that country. So you can't agree to reduce somebody's pay less than national minimum wage. If they're working under the furlough scheme, it can go below national minimum wage. But if they're working, you can't agree to that. You can't agree to less than statutory holiday pay for an employee as well. And that's 5.6 weeks of leave a year. Now, if you've got an employee, though, who has more than 5.6 weeks of leave a year, you could agree to them to take down to 5.6 weeks, and their entitlement comes down for that year to help you through the furlough time. Obviously, the same as I said before, both parties need to agree on that as well. But how furlough works is, let's say we've got an employee who does have 5.6 weeks, or we don't want to reduce it. They continue to accrue annual leave during the furlough period. Number two, they can take annual leave while on furlough. Now, you might ask why. Why would an employee take annual leave while they're on furlough? Well, for that annual leave, they'll receive 100% pay for that period. They would get 100% pay, and we can claim 80% of that back through the job retention scheme. But what's happening a lot now, and what's happening with a lot of businesses we advise, is that it's a good option and a sensible option to think about, is that do you want employees coming back in November with 5.6 weeks leave to take in November, December? Now, you've got the option of being able to roll that over for 2 years, if that is your holiday year as well. You've got the option to roll that over for 2 years. But as a business operationally, what if the employee just requests it and says, right, I'm back. Thanks, boss, I'm back November. Here's my leave request. I think I'll just take the rest of November off, and then I'll take Christmas off as well, and I'll come back in for a couple of weeks in December. Where are we at as a business then? We're looking at refusing those requests. What we want is employees to come back without that big bulk of annual leave. So what we're allowed to do under the working time regulations is we're allowed to require an employee to take leave, as long as we give that employee double the notice of the leave we're requiring them to take. Now, the government haven't stayed silent on this point. The government have actually clarified this is what you can do, which was really good, is that they're thinking that this is what businesses should be thinking about. That's what you should be thinking about as a business owner. If that's what you want to do, you might not want to do that. But you've got to appreciate the situation that you're going to come back to with employees having a big chunk of leave when they might have been off work for 4, 5, 6 months. They're off work. They're coming back with a big chunk of leave that they've then got to use as well. So as long as we give them double the notice, so 2 weeks notice to take 1 week's leave, it takes you 3 weeks to make somebody take a week's holiday, that we do that and we give them notice that we're going to do that as well. Obviously, the first option is try and get the employee to agree to take it themselves. But if they won't do that, we have the option as businesses to do that. And I would be thinking as a business, if I hadn't done that already, about whether I want to do that and the time I've got left under the scheme as well, because you want them to do that while they're on furlough before that job retention scheme ends as well. Okay, Jeanette, what do we need to pay an employee who's unable to return to work due to childcare or caring responsibilities? Now, I think I covered this one off, and that question might come in a little bit after that. I think I've covered this one off with a few options that we've got for an employee who can't come back because of childcare, especially with what's happening with the schools. Can leave them on furlough, can agree a period of unpaid leave. We've also got the option of a disciplinary route as well, but obviously attracts a substantial amount of risk. But with any employee, you need to pay them what they're due under their contract. They have a contract, and you pay what's due under that contract, whether you have work or not as a business, unless you've agreed something else, which in this case is furlough. Hina, this is a question that I've been asking myself as well, and I'll have a definitive answer for this on Friday. We got some really good help from somebody who sent me an email today as well about this, which I covered off at the beginning. But I wanted clarification that an employee who was furloughed since the 23rd of March, we then asked them to come back to work last week for 2 days as we had some work for them. We then put them back on furlough before the 10th of June, so they'll be eligible for the new scheme in July. Is this correct? That employee will be fine. That situation will be fine, because as long as they're furloughed before today or on today, we're okay. It's the ones that we say aren't currently on furlough today, but were on furlough earlier in the year. Can we use that time spent earlier in the year for it? And as I was saying before, Jackie sent me in a really good email from the HMRC, which clarifies that in their opinion that's going to be okay. I've not had confirmation from the HMRC myself yet, but that was something which was sent out to businesses. But in your case, Hina, yes, that will be fine, because the employee, despite what happened back in March, is on furlough now before the 10th deadline. So it has been on before the 10th deadline. Stephen, we've added someone to the furlough scheme as from yesterday, but we don't submit our next submission for 2 weeks' time. Is this still okay? Yeah, that's fine. It's not about when the submission's sent in, it's when the employee themselves is placed on a period of furlough to be able to use the new scheme. So as long as that's done before today, then that's okay. Okay, another question here from Hema. Good. If we've been paying 100%, can we reduce the percentage paid? This is a question, actually, I'm glad somebody's asked, because this is a question that I've been getting asked by a lot of businesses. A lot of businesses went into this thinking, initially, remember, go back, we thought this was 3 months initially. A lot of us thought this would last a bit longer. But the initial scheme that we got launched to us was 3 months long. And a lot of businesses said in that circumstance, we're going to pay you 100% pay. Scheme's 3 months, we're going to pay 100% pay. And they budgeted for that 20% difference of making that up for their employees. But the circumstances might have changed now. And what we're looking at now is this scheme running all the way until the end of October, affecting some businesses until the end of October. A lot of employers want to revisit that. Now, what you've got to think about with furlough is furlough needs to be agreed between both parties, between the employer and the employee. We can change that or rescind that agreement at any point. But if we're going to do that, we need to have a discussion with that employee about what we're going to do. A lot of it depends on the original furlough letter itself and how long that period was agreed for, exactly what we said in that letter as well, and how long it was agreed, and have to have a look at that letter. But in principle, yes, you can agree with an employee that we don't have the financial resource anymore. We're going to reduce this down to 80%. Like I said before, you can't go below 80% because then you can't use the scheme. But yes, you could say that we want to go below 80%, but you need to agree that with the employee and just think about how you approach that as well, how you approach that with the employee and how that's done. Okay. So okay, Michelle, this is a question we're getting asked quite a lot as well, is what can we do with staff who will not complete training we require them to do whilst on furlough? So when it comes to training is a really interesting point, because with training, what you've got a situation where you want the employee to train while they're on furlough. And what the government says about this is that it's very explicit that they want employees to undertake training while they're on furlough. We're allowed to do that. We're allowed to have them training. In fact, as a business, I would always encourage that employees do training while they're on a period of furlough as well. I think that's really important, because what you want to do is make sure that the skills of those employees are kept up to date. We're saying that we've got employees who have been off work for a little while, and what we're thinking is that their skill set is going down and is depleting, and we want to make sure that that level of work that they're doing, the skill set that they've got, doesn't travel down under that period. So I think it's really relevant to get them training. The thing you've got is when that transitions into work, you can't have that transition all the way into work. That's something that you need to make sure is right. So you can't have them working under that period, but you want staff to complete training that you require them to do. Now, somebody asked me last week, what if an employee just says, I refuse to train because I'm getting paid 100% or 80% anyway. I'm not going to get paid any more if I train. So why would I want to do training? Now, I think that is something that I would be looking to invoke the disciplinary process on. That's a reasonable management instruction. Depends what your documents say, but that will be something that I would be making sure that I would be raising to them, to say that if you don't do this, this is reasonable for me to ask this, and we're going to be looking at the disciplinary process as well. Just got one here. William, you just mentioned employers will be covering an IM pension in July. I thought it was the 1st of August onwards. Sorry, did I say July? So August, employers are going to be paying NIM pension contributions. Okay, that's from August. September, remember, so August, September, October, remember that we pay them exactly the same. August, employers are paying NIM pension contributions. September, that means that we can claim back 70%, and October, we can claim back 60%. Yeah, so it's exactly the same as what we can claim for June and July. That's exactly the same as it is now. It changes August, September, October. That's when it comes down. So August, NIM pension contributions we can't claim for. September, we can only claim 70% back. October, 60% back. Hope that clarifies that. So we've got employees, this is from Jeanette, we've got employees who are shielding and they're in the extremely vulnerable category. Can we leave them on furlough indefinitely with their agreement? Well, indefinitely, no. The furlough scheme's ending in October. So we've got a defined period on how long the furlough scheme is going to be live for. So they can't be on there indefinitely, but we can utilise that scheme up until the end of October. Obviously thinking about whether or not those employees can work from home. But yeah, you do have the option of that scheme up until the end of October, with it tapering down on what you can claim back as well. Okay, Kristen, a small acting agency who only gets income from commissions, bearing in mind actors aren't able to work right now, how am I expected to pay the additional cost to my staff when no money is coming in? I'm not prepared to take a loan as I'm looking towards retirement, so what do you suggest I do here? This is something that's so funny, because I was talking to a dance school quite recently about something similar. So an acting agency, we're generating no income at the moment. So what we've got a situation where we're not looking at hopefully there'll be a position where in the next few weeks you start to generate income, and people start to come in, and that starts to pick up again. But if you don't, and you don't feel like the job retention scheme and what you can claim back under that scheme, which is tapering down, is going to satisfy you and your business, you need to be thinking about other options that you've got as well. Other options you've got as a business there are laying employees off. So you need a layoff clause to do that, but that doesn't mean that they get paid the 80% they get paid before. They get paid statutory guarantee payment for that period, which is a much lower payment, but bear in mind you can't claim anything back for that. You could agree a period of unpaid leave with them as well, which would mean that you wouldn't be incurring any cost for that period. And another option that a lot of businesses are thinking about now, and I probably think the first option on the list is redundancies. That is that is an option that a lot of businesses are taking who don't see light at the end of the tunnel as to when they're going to be opening again. Now, bear in mind the risks that are attached to redundancy, the unfair dismissal, all of the problems that go along with that, and we're helping a lot of clients through those processes at the moment. But that would be another option that I'd be thinking about as well. If that's a cash flow issue, and that's something you've got to consider. Hope that helps. Okay, Lisa, a bit of a follow-on from this, but this is a really good question actually. We have staff on furlough, and we know that we will not have enough work for them for some time. And this is the case for a lot of businesses now. Yeah, the economy is going to be reopening and substantially reopening as of Monday as well. But they can't envisage that even for the rest of this calendar year, there's going to be work that they think there will be. We don't think that we will have work part-time at the moment. As an alternative to redundancy, are we able to reduce staff hours if both parties agree as an amendment to their contract, and can we implement this now whilst they're still on furlough? So, yes, you can agree to reduce hours with an employee. That hasn't changed. The reduction of hours with an employee hasn't changed, and the ability to agree a period of furlough and pay 80% of whatever contract that employee is working under is how the law works at the moment. So bear in mind how that works. There's a process to that, how that works, how you need to evidence acceptance as well. But yes, we can make an offer to an employee of new terms and conditions, and they can accept that offer as well. So that's something we can do. Okay, so Louise, how would redundancies need to be dealt with for staff currently on furlough who are no longer needed within that business? Well, when you're dealing with redundancies as a business, you need to follow, first of all, if you've got a redundancy process within your documents, within your handbook, have you got a redundancy policy which runs concurrent to your contract of employment in your handbook? You've got that redundancy policy which sits there. So that's something you need to think about first of all. If not, you need to follow the statutory rules on how to do that, and there's rules on how to deal with redundancies, how much consultation you do. Some of this depends on employee size as well. How many employees are related to this process? You need to go through consultation with those and think about a set of criteria that we need to be thinking about, criteria which is fair, which is balanced, about how employees are selected for redundancy as well. But you could speak to employees, you could consult with employees about redundancy while they're on furlough as well. So that's something that could happen, and unfortunately it's a reality that a lot of businesses are looking at the moment as well. But to talk about a specific process or anything like that, we'd need to speak to you and give you a little bit more advice about your business when it comes to that specific one. Okay, Andrea, so if I have a member of staff working 24 hours a week, I want them to return for 10 hours to start with. Sounds really sensible. So I pay the 10 hours and I claim furlough for the 14 hours. I think so. I think that's how it's going to work. The only reason I say I think so rather than I know what the answer to that's going to be is that we don't have the specific rules on how this is going to work until Friday. The only example that the Chancellor gave was about days worked. And he said in a 5-day working week, the employee works 3, you claim furlough. They're furloughed for the other 2, you claim under the job retention scheme for the other 2. What he didn't say was hours, but I would think almost certainly that it translates to hours, because you've got a lot of employees who work on a set amount of hours per week. I think that will translate to hours as well. And I got a question earlier about part days and half days and things like that as well. So I think that's something that that should get and almost certainly will get clarified on Friday. So that brings me on nicely to say that's the end of the Q&A session. I think we got through a lot today. Hopefully that was a help to a lot of people, some really practical advice about your business and how that job retention scheme works. So what is going to happen next week is when we're on here next week, we'll have the new rules that are coming out on Friday about how the new flexible scheme is going to work. And when we've got that, I'll be able to run through exactly what the specifics of that are next week. I'll talk about how that applies to your businesses. But like a lot of businesses have been doing over the last 3 or 4 weeks, is they thought this was great, but they want some more contact from us. They want some more questions answering. They want some more help. They want to speak to us a little bit more about how we can help with their HR, with their health and safety side of things. It's not a problem. So the contact details of how to get in touch with us over the phone is 0800 046 3179. And then if you want to get in touch with us over the web, It's krona.co.uk/FB Live for Facebook Live. So /FB Live. And you've got the ability on there to ask us a question if you want some more information, if you want a bit more guidance about what's going on. Feel free to contact us by those methods as well. But that's the end of the session today. I think it's been really good. And when we get on here next week, we'll have a lot more information about how this flexible scheme is going to work. I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Bye.